Thank you. Thank you very much, and for another great session. So we're looking forward to our last session now, which will be, also talking about similar issues around sustainability and tourism as well. And I think the ecological factor will be quite important in this too. So Jesper, you'll be giving our first talk, and I'm not sure if your title has changed or not, but I love the sound of it, about enchanting narratives and architecture and local ecotourism development. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being invited. Well, I will try to share my screen and see what's going on here. Yeah, are you able to see it?
Yes, it's still on the main screen. If you want to share click the little button to make it full screen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not coming from cultural heritage studies or the tourism sector. I humbly come from environmental protection studies and transition studies in different technical fields, whatever. But I took this wild step some time ago with my baggage from looking at transition processes and different types of chain processes that I would like to apply together with good colleagues of mine in the tourism sector. So that's just one first thing to say. Another thing is to say I put too many words into it. I realized from your beautiful talkings that I've lost the culture of only pictures and few words. Beginning too many lectures on screen to students who claimed there was too few words and pictures, how to pass when I was just talking and things like that. So forgive me the many words. So the idea is to talk about merging cultural and nature heritage with the business sector development in tourism in order to establish some kind of dynamic that would actually enhance sustainable tourism. Sustainable tourism, the departure is in Denmark. Sustaining tourism or ecotourism have never really kickstarted, as opposed to Germany or Norway and Sweden. So we have a trade which have been totally unregulated and which have a number of environmental problems related to it. So this was kind of the background for joining in with guides and others to find, would there be any kind of path, any window of opportunity to start from somewhere else. And this was then taking two regions, Land of Beowulfs and Roskilde and Amager Nature Park, and involving ecotourism with narratives as A Legend Alive and the Man-Made Land, with different sites to visit, but also to enchant. So the enchanting part has to do with narratives and has to do with architecture. So the historical background, as I perceive it, is that we do have a lot of nature, environmental, sustainability regulation and climate mitigation regulations, well-established institutions, whatever. We also have a tourism sector which have taken some small, the green key, small, very small steps, but we do not have any kind of long-term sustainability or ecotourism policies or programs. Cultural heritage visits is a rising interest in the public and among tourists. As you know, Vikings, as some of you also mentioned, very popular to visit different sites where the Vikings used to live or whatever. Stone Age also, and early modernity also is becoming a new thing, to visit what happened in the 40s and the 50s and have small museum villages that maintain the early modernity technology and elderly people going and working there. It's quite nice. Now, we also have, as a newcomer, national and nature parks, which is going through a wild development, meaning there are no national regulations preserving anything. As like if you say Germany, Norway, and Sweden, if they know how we do not regulate any kind of behavior within our national parks or nature parks, they will laugh because it's so regulated, especially in Norway. But there's a current trend on rewilding, and extremely many Danes are visiting these parks during the corona, but also beforehand. So there's a growing attention to the role of parks, nature parks. And as you might know, Denmark is not Sweden, it's not Norway, it's a very small country, so it's very urbanized. But there are small green spots. So there's a contemporary focus on distinct themes in urban nature's, you could say, blue-green development, sustaining the ecosystem's provisions to the urban areas. So the efforts in Denmark have not been successful. Very small. I just list them here. I won't be listing them. But the window of opportunity we took were exactly on the nature and national parks. I mean, on top of lack of any kind of strategy, a lack of a business formulated type of green efforts, green keys, whatever. Here we have full of cultural heritage and nature heritage sites. Recently, it's quite culturalized. There's a lot of agro-urban sprawl around them, and some are under rewildering. So it's, so to speak, it's national nature parks, very much influenced by culture, very much influenced by infrastructure and whatever. So we might take this as an opportunity to hinder further sprawling, further urbanization, to open more deeply for tourism.
Jesper, could you stop the share and start it again? Because I think your screen's frozen on the first slide. Just because we're not seeing past that. Yeah. And then a bit like Laura's in the first one, I think it just needs to restart again. Thanks.
Is it okay?
Yes, it's fine now. Thank you.
What did you miss? Never mind that.
No.
It all made perfect sense, so it's fine. But it's just so.
Yeah, but this is the presenter view, okay?
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. So you need.
This is just okay.
You need to share the presentation view, not the presenter's view.
It has to go back out again.
So it works now. You see?
No. You have to stop it and share the presentation, not the present. Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
Have to open. Yeah.
works?
Yeah. Brilliant.
All right. Only thing is that I can't move anything about it, but that's, I find another way. Yeah, okay. So, the window of opportunity I'm going to talk about is about these nature and national parks as a place for forming ecotourism and having guides engaged to guiding into cultural and nature heritage as a window for pushing the general tourism regime. This is the whole idea around. So we've actually had a quite strong tradition in Denmark for visiting or guiding in cultural and nature heritage by nature interpretation guides, but mainly for local residents. It's about 9,000 to 10,000 events every year. These guides around 400 takes. And then we have guided tour for tourists and locals, but mainly on cultural topics, and there are some private entrepreneurs. And this is most on cultural heritage in cities and museums, whatever. So could we bring these two separate guide regimes together? This is sort of like the challenge we thought of. So urban ecotourism is, you have the gray one is conventional tourism. This is the total. Then you have had since the 70s sustainable tourism efforts. Then you have nature tourism since the 20s or 30s, and ecotourism efforts since the 80s, merging then to say urban ecotourism, sustainable ecosystem provision nature-city interaction, and combining it with interpretation and education of guides and tourists. This is it. This goes all along with the international, you could say, trends. But urban ecotourism is a newcomer. So our outset was that we didn't have any tradition for guiding in ecotourism or in sustainable tourism, and guides often perceive themselves as hire fireworkers on very safe routes. We do have these 400 nature interpreters enacting, enchanting, teaching, and doing all kinds of things from wild food to storytelling, but not for tourists. So many tour guides we know of from my university in Roskilde in Denmark are well educated, full of interesting historical and cultural profiles, have a lot of knowledge on cultural heritage, but very few are on nature areas on sustainability, and very few have any role for them to develop the tours. They're hired and fired, daily workers, you know, like in the harbor in the old days. So, weak tradition on urban tourism, few interesting cases. We found in our literature review, we went all over Europe and looked for this on the role of ecotourism and cities, and the role of guides. Very weak tradition in Barcelona, in Toronto, in Berlin, some specific places, but very weak tradition. So we had the idea that we might become front runners, which you might know is a good idea when you want to have research grant for it. There are no tradition for involving guides in research and development or in park development. So this might be, we could find a way forward to differentiate trained guides from the bulk. They might become interested in this. Now, the review also told that guiding in ecotourism or sustainable tourism has very low impact when it comes to long-term behavior among tourists. Tourists have been the one who have been in focus concerning, do sustainable tourism makes a difference when we talk about guiding? And the disappointing answer is no. It's a very, very few things. So we thought, of course, we have to have a learning approach in what we develop, but the main focus should be on establishing some kind of niche for getting the business on board, to push the business in a direction. So we could ask, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 ones of them, we could ask, of course, where are the guides and where are cultural heritage? If you look at all the guidelines along this, it is not combined. So this is innovative from you guys to think about this. So what we wanted was to avoid traditional R&D trajectories in destination development or improvement schemes. The literature and practice is full. You can have 20 meters of manuals on how to develop ecotourism or parks or sustaining, whatever. Tour guides are working poor, but they are the ones bridging the industry, destination, culture, and tourists. So involving them could be both in empowerment and product, and also to secure a maintenance of what we develop. They would be the ones who carry it. Also, we wanted to ask ourselves, how could we challenge ourselves and partners in order to leave path dependency? So we are part of the problem as researchers and guides or whatever who joined them. There's some kind of quotings, if you look at literature on optimism on guides and ecotourism. Tour guides as mediators and promoters of sustainable tourism. Well, tour guides certainly can increase the knowledge of the tourists, says Lee, and what tour guides do and have and say has a great influence on how tourists experience the destination. Tour guides can contribute to the realization of sustainable development objectives by actively managing the tourist experience. These kind of wordings, you could say, of wishful thinking are around, but also you can find that the quoting from problematization. Contribution of tour guiding to sustainable development are rarely giving more than lip service. A famous Wheeler and Black Australian review. sustainable transition is controlled, or tourism is controlled by other stakeholders and largely beyond the influence of tour guides. But you could ask for more research on are there any kind of pathways, and this we took up then and tried to do. So we wanted to have an outcome of developing sustainable urban ecotour products, which guides, companies and guides could be entrepreneurs in. We wanted to establish urban ecotourism and entrepreneurship in models at the university for the ones who want to become tour guides. By the way, these might be people who have been in other businesses. These might be people who have an academic degree, but want to take a step and become guides. We wanted to create a network to further development, a sustainable transition among the guides. And then we wanted to establish this, you could say, destination development by local identity framing, cultural heritage and sustainability, and a prospect for tourism in the 2 parks that we went along with. Finally, a blueprint for a scalable model for urban eco with parks. And yes, we resolved it in the bubbles, as we just listed. I won't bore you with this, but also it was interesting that every one of us in the project, and which I think, if you're interested in stakeholder involvement and getting that as researchers, we became developers and change agents. We had our problems in that, but we have to become that and try to mingle with the trade and the business in order to, you could say, refrain from just observing and analyzing. Architects we involved, I'll come back to that. They found new anchor points in getting in touch with locals and with heritage, in deeper in their efforts in constructing icons of any kind, path, what we use them for. Guides became entrepreneurs and just developing their own kind of narratives, developing their own kind of business. Parks found a focused identity. You could say we all joined in by visioning in practice by constructs, narratives, and a deliberation. So the project went on actually until 2020, ended last year, in these steps with these partners. So reviewing on what do we know about ecotourism and urban ecotourism and the role of learning when it comes to the guides. How could we establish narratives of the destinations, the sites we wanted to work with, involving architects, which are perfect in designing from new narratives. And we found Northern architects who are very good at this. So this is a warning. Not all architects are very good at sort of like getting their fingers in the soil, but they exist. And they also are the ones who are very keen on developing narratives, historical narratives. So on top of that, product development of guidings and tours to educate the travelers work to take place. And finally, establish some kind of theoretical model and a blueprint. Could this be spread? Am I doing well? Can you hear me? Things like that? All right. Again, sorry for all the words. The text. And this is just to say, for those of you who are who do know René Kemp and Giles and Adrian Smith and on this transition theory, we took a departure in a school of thought called transition theory, which has been going on for the last 15 years, which mingles political science, technology studies, and economics, with also some kind of everyday life, culture, knowledge. Just to say that if you want in a market-based society to have any kind of chance to alter a path dependency of a trade or business sector like on transporting, clothes, eating, tourism, whatever, you might hope for strong regulation, or you might hope for companies or you might hope for NGOs, whatever. But you might also try to get NGOs, entrepreneurs, developers engaged in niche development, which is the blue, what do you call it, on the right part. So if you look at the model left, the down left, this is the total model of trying to develop small niches and then develop them so far that they actually have a chance to come up and compete with what goes on within the current regime, like renewable energy sites, windmills and whatever, which happened in the 70s or the 80s. Or think about organic food in the 70s to 80s, totally experiencing, but at some part succeeded in stabilizing a lot of things. And now, well, in Denmark, you have a food regime which is partly organic, quite strongly, and you have a renewable energy regime, part of the regime, which is quite strong. So we thought of, could we somehow kickstart a niche development by providing the right actors, the right stakeholders in establishing an arena to form urban nature niche, a guiding bureau, but together with all the partners. Could we then somehow influence the practice of the current regime? And are there any kind of things going on within the landscape currently, which actually makes it easier? Changes in society, climate changes, new trends in tourism. So one of the things which have been part of the landscape for opening this kind of niche in ecotourism has been over-tourism. Over-tourism is not only in Barcelona and Berlin or whatever, it's also in Copenhagen. It's also partly in other cities. And we also have a growing interest, as you know, especially under the pandemic, of nature tourism. The locals, both Catherine and Laura had mentioned this. So the approach has been to a destination development approach, explore and develop the park's culture and nurture heritage by narrative development, identity development, and try to push the tourism infrastructure in a way together with the local actors and stakeholders. Then the product development by educating the guides to become urban ecotourist guides. So they could take this leapfrog to become entrepreneurs and develop innovative urban ecotourism products. And then this final stage of establishing a scalable model, could we get other parks into it? Again, this is a question about getting parks and park development and the tourism sector together for ecotourism and sustainable tourism around cultural and nature heritage. So we had all these stakeholders involved in a number of workshops, and this is just to say it takes time. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of people from different sectors if you want to establish within tourism a niche which will have any chance to influence regime partners. Now, as you all know, when it comes to sustainability or it comes to sustainable tourism or ecotourism, we all might have very different angles or perceptions of what it is. So we have to establish a number of workshops to get these partners, I just show, involved in tactical, practical experiments and measures, and having them to co-develop tours, guided tours in the parks. And what you see in the middle, I don't know what you call it in English. Jens, can you help me? Løvens Hule, the Cave of the Lions, experts from the trade, which you have to go forward and show what you do. And they say thumbs up or thumb down, things like that.
It's a TV concept of, I guess you've seen
Dragon's
it.
Den, I think, in English.
Sorry?
It's Dragon's Den in English. I think it's a similar thing in the
Yeah.
US, where it was entrepreneurs who say yes or no. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
There's an even better one, Jesper. It's called Løvens Bule. It's a satirical on it. So it's hilarious.
Thank you. So, the architects we brought in, called Norrøn, they, as I told you, they pushed their methodology in order not to make les beaux-arts, spectacular icons, whatever. So they worked on how can we go to the two parks together with researchers and guides and the local stakeholders in establishing a narrative and prospects which had to do with understanding storytelling before the suggestions for the prospects come. So the narrative is a very strong thing that they developed. It deeply rooted in the place and at the same time unique enough to set apart it from other places. This was the idea. And the concrete proposals had to take the starting point in deep understanding of the place. So it took half a year of literature reviewing, but also in contacting just to get state of the art. What kind of place or situation are we in with these two parks? Well, place-bound potentials were found in the method, both environmentally, culturally, and economically. I think we all agree upon this is necessary. And the narrative should encompass all this. So the environment is the physical layers, the landscape types, natural qualities, built environment, and protective regulations framing the area. Cultural, intangible layers in the form of stories, people, traditions, and myths to ensure the development of a common narrative based on reinforces existing narratives and self-perception in the park. The latter part, this is difficult. How do locals perceive their own park? This we really missed to do properly, but we did efforts with PGIS system, having people to talk about their favorite places and things like that. And then, as Laurent, you have to have the economy in place, facilitating layers in the form of actors, attractions, facilities, and infrastructures. Who would invest in any kind of things in these parks? So, the man-made layer. So this is now architects talking in the Norrøn, trying to merge culture, heritage, and images of the park here of Naturpark Amager, which is a man-made land. It's just like 80 years old. Before that, it was ocean. And trying to capture the story, the narratives within it. I won't go in detail with it, you can read. I guess, Jens, that the slides are to be read if some of you are interested. And Skjoldeholmsland, which I'm currently sitting in near Roskilde, which is the Beowulf history, the Vikings history, the kingdoms, whatever, also trying to capture the narratives and prospects for the land and the sea, the fjord, and get ideas of what are we talking about. So this is their prospect, beginning with this kind of national romantic picturing, which of course is also made to get the parks involved and interested. If you say we're going to sustain your park tourism, you get, please stay out of my park. So this is also how to use pictures and narratives in order to get closer to power. So this is about how to find the narratives, the identity to a park when you start on this. So the PGIS, the people talking about preferred places were put in here of different kind of values, which influenced it. And then, of course, the history of the Skjoldeholm, of the Beowulf and the kings at the fjord and the country, well-known stories, which some people know of, but especially tourists are very interested in. And we do have a living Viking ship culture at the Roskilde fjord. So this boat is actually sailing in there, I think about 20 boats or in total, taking tourists also. So for the Roskilde city, but also for the national park and for the tourist, Vikings is of extreme importance. So this was an idea to establish an icon to enchant. The Viking ship museum, which is currently has to be taken down because it's too destroyed. But climate change is also going on. So the waves are coming in. So you have to establish some kind of climate mitigation along it. So the idea was to bring the Blue Ring Fortress in. Coastal protection of the Viking ship museum in Roskilde, and then also have the Viking boats inside this area and have an underwater museum. Another place with old castle, try to rebuild some architectonically, what do you call this, Høvding, Jens? Viking Høvding?
A chief.
Yeah, something like the buildings you found in the Lejre area. Try to reconstruct that to have tourists to stay there. So these are hotels in the area. Now, the companies, some of the companies that were established were quite successful, like Green is the New Black. You can have a look at that another time. Established the connection between green areas around Copenhagen and Copenhagen, trying to look at how can we establish a small company which takes tourism by bikes or the metro or walks. How can we show sustainable architecture? How can we look at Amager nature parks, the cultural heritage in this by non-polluting ways? How can we make storytelling about the efforts of sustaining Copenhagen? There are a lot of talkings around it, but how can we actually tell honestly tourists about this? The greatest challenge I found in this project was to get tourist guides to become honest, to say, forget about these smooth pictures, forget about the narratives of, oh, in Denmark, in Copenhagen, everybody are biking and we're eating organic foods all the time. And oh yes, we are so green and so beautiful. And I tell you, this is one of the dangers among. So to train them and to be honest, to relax, shoulders down and say, yes, this is an effort. Yes, this is beautiful. This is very interesting. A lot of things happen, but, you know, always the dark side. Backstage should be also front stage. Now, I just put some of the articles. We have a lot of prospects, but they are in Danish, but some of them are in English. There's a place you can link to on urban ecotourism. And the last thing I wanted to say is shameful as a researcher, if you want to join in and try to push the tourism trade and bring in what you guys want to maintain cultural and nature heritage by sustaining tourism and getting tourists to become interested into it, you have to, as a researcher, try to get so involved with the business that you actually develop magazines like this, PR magazine. This is the right part is Visit Denmark, the national tourist organization. Whoa, what can you see around? And the others are efforts trying to push the trade by communicating the same way, the same type of pictures. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jesper. If you're unsure. Great. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I have loads of questions, but I'm going to let Anna give her paper first and I will keep them. But it was really, really fascinating. And I really love the ideas of the types of stakeholders that you're working with, which we don't always think about. So can I ask Anna if she is ready to give her presentation? Okay. I will let you know if your screen doesn't share properly.
No, I don't need them. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jesper. It was a real pleasure to hear your speech. green is a new black. I have to remember this. But before I start, thank you for inviting me to this conference. My name is Dziadkiewicz, and I work at the marketing department at the Faculty of Management at the University of Gdańsk. And today I would like to share my findings. So we are working in parallel projects, the common axis of which is tourism in the South Baltic region. My project is about well-being tourism. So I think that, like me, you have recently noticed changes in the behavior and attitudes of our tourists. From my perspective as an economist and researcher in the social sciences, I can only add that the pandemic has caused people to focus more on their own needs, to stop in this pursuit of money and career, and to want to experience emotions also in tourism or by tourism. Increasingly, traveling is taking place according to the 3E idea: entertainment, excitement, education, rather than the common, well-known, the 3S model: sun, sand, and sea. The attitude of the tourists in the 21st century, compounded by the pandemic, has been transformed. And one can observe that they expect interaction, intelligence, satisfaction of cognitive needs from the tourist product, and not only passive line on the beach. So what I can observe is that the Baltic Sea region is an example of how tourist development depends on the well-executed idea for the tourism product, not just a climate zone. Research to tourism organization in Sweden, Denmark also, but in Lithuania, Germany, and Poland indicates that the destination of the Baltic Sea is currently more prosperous and attracts more tourists than the Caribbean. Therefore, it seems to me that archaeotourism will thrive because to the 3 E's mentioned, it is worth adding a fourth factor, ethnicity, you mentioned about, which in the case of both my well-being tourism project and in Archaeobalt means focusing on the cultural and environmental heritage of our Baltic region. What I can suggest and what I can see when I do research on tourists' attitude is a growing awareness of sustainable, Jesper mentioned before. By this, I mean working for the benefit of local communities, local business, and leaving the visited place intact, at least to have a neutral impact of environment. I therefore believe that our activities, both those of tourism project and those of the tourism business, should above all promote attitudes towards sustainable development, because this is what our tourists will be looking for and expect from our offer. And here I would like to ask maybe all of you the question: do you also observe changes in tourist attitudes? And do you also observe that our activities based on sustainable can influence the popularization of archaeotourism? Thank you. I think it's 3:30, so everybody is exhausted after this long session. Yes, Jesper, tell, yeah.
Thank you for your comments. And also thank you. I cannot read it now, but I see there are some comments on the chat. Yes, I also read WTHO and studies of current pandemic situation within the tourism sector, and how does the trade reflect upon this? And as you might know, there are major crises, especially concerning what they call krydstogtbranchen, the big ships. I mean, it's
cruise ship.
Yeah, the cruise ships. This whole culture stopped, which is very pleasant. So there's so much tangible experiences that you can change anything. Actually, big politics do play a role when we talk about pandemics. So this, I think, also the tourism trade have learned, and also World Tourism Organization have learned. So their studies on, I've seen the survey, what do tourists in Europe, they did so in 2019, published it last year, how do they perceive sustainable tourism, and what do they expect from it? And here it very much, which you address, is what you can see, that it's about the local people, that you do not disturb local people too much. This is something that you immediately can respond to. But also among many tourists, that this is just a new normal, not just, but taken for granted, that if you come as a tourist to Poland, to Norway, whatever, that the new normal have stabilized. So there's no idea about flashing, that you don't have to wash the towels every day, whatever. It should be a standard. But there are some quality expectations if you deliberately then address, here you can visit organic farms, or here is a clothing factory with in circular economy that you can visit, whatever, learn from. Here you expect some kind of quality added to it. This is their survey saying, so there's a new normal. It's very much, very much don't disturb the locals. And then, of course, it's environment, of course, it is on not disturbing the climate, whatever. But this is more of course. It's more interesting what happens with local people, and also inclusion. Poor people, disabled, whatever. It's also a matter when WHO asks around. I don't know if that was a relevant comment, but it came to my mind when you said it.
No, that's great. I was going to actually connect this, what you were just saying, to the question actually in the chat box, which I think is relevant to a lot of the talks today. So if anybody wants to jump in, because I think this connection between tourists as people who come to somewhere against locals being slightly different is quite a good point, particularly now in the pandemic where we can't move as freely as we used to. So Beth's question was that she was actually, she's in New Mexico, so she has zoomed in for this today. And she said that the talks have given her ideas about how to think about revising museums' mission statements and how to think about the balance between tourism and local involvement. How would you go about determining the similarities and differences in their interests and participation? Which I think is actually a really great question. So anybody, like the last panel or anyone before, I think would be really useful to hear your answers. Yeah, Nick, do you put your hand up?
I think many of the things are related in the part of how is designed the project and the role the local communities take during the decision making. It is that they are supposed to be part from the very beginning of this process, and sometimes they are placed at the very end, or sometimes they are not considered. So is how do we design this? How do we plan from the very beginning, and with this be part of these stakeholders?
Yeah.
And this is not pretty well done in many, to have good examples, but then in some cases needed.
Yeah, so I think Laura put her hand up first, and then Catherine. You're very simultaneous, so I may have seen that wrong.
Okay, I will start briefly, and it really builds upon what you just said, Nick. I think, yeah, the involvement from the very beginning of a project changes very much the type of involvement that we can expect of also afterwards. If citizens, if a community is involved from the very beginning, in the sense of coming together and deciding about what's the purpose, what's the use of a given place, then that use, that purpose will be actually done because it was jointly decided. And so the practice that I mentioned before about going before the idea of residents local as just ambassadors, as hosts, but as really taking part in the local tourism council and taking an active role in the decision making, I think it's pivotal. And considering also, yes, the current circumstances, so this chance that we have also to focus and to restart from thinking about the local, the residents dimension and the cultural heritage which is surrounding us pushes a bit in this direction. I think that this cannot, however, be detached also from considering other aspects and a bit a broader perspective, in the sense of like maybe also extending the timing of opening and making the cultural heritage sites even less and less like towers of knowledge, but more like squares, making them really places more for people to meet and to use them with also different functions. During like the lockdown, there was very much a call from artists and the people practicing from the cultural heritage sector in Italy, while the museums, while the theater, everything was closed because of security measure, to open again these spaces with maybe extended hour in order to reduce the people coming in, but also embracing different functions of these places, making like the heritage institution also places to discuss, to present, to hear about. And so I think that the involvement of the communities and the idea of making a museum, not only a place where I can go and see an artifact, but where I can have also a say about the cultural creation, which is taking place in the place I live, I think this would make a bit of the change.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, I think ties in well with Jesper's point about empowering people. Catherine, do you want to say something as well?
Yeah, thanks. It's adding on, continuing to add on to this idea, because after we had been talking on my panel about this idea about collaboration, and I thought immediately after, I should have said that it's the site managers that maybe aren't so keen on collaborating and the sort of competitive element. But what happens is, what I found was that it's the reenactors in these sites and maybe the tour guides in these sites who have a huge network from other sites, and they're the ones that are actually the ones who are connecting them the most and are most proud of being a sort of part of a community. Craftsmen who go from site to site throughout the summer, go from market to market, or whatever kind of landscape you're working with. So I think that's like one kind of driver that we don't often think about in terms of this collaboration and getting the local involvement, is that they are actually quite good in connecting to other places, even if the sort of management level doesn't want to make these connections or resists this. And the second one, and this is actually a question for Jesper then, because I think it's also very difficult to talk about the local community in such a sort of, egoistic way, because it's so hard to define a local community when you have very different sites from rural. It's much easier to connect with the local community if it's just small villages and towns, and you can reach out to them quite easily. I'm doing that right now, and my survey data is enormous because it's so easy to get to people who are really involved and active. But if you're working in an urban context, and I'm thinking about Jesper's examples, because you gave these beautiful reinterpretations and sort of almost like sort of place branding of these new sites, and absolutely gorgeous architectural pictures and these really great narratives. But at the same time, my critical heritage cap went on and thinking much of this is the sort of dominant narrative of these places maybe, and how they're and especially in urban contexts, they can be quite exclusionary of other people. Sort of, are you excluding the urban narrative of, a multiculturalism? And sort of if you stick to, I mean, of course I also do Viking stuff, so it's not a huge criticism, but how did you negotiate working with urban ecotourism when you have much more narratives that maybe get left out if you sort of have this sort of dominant narrative coming through?
Laura, should I respond?
Sure.
it's just so spot on. Thank you, Catherine, for seeing this. Because as I think I stopped to say that we failed. We failed to get deep enough grounding with the locals. So I couldn't say after, I think we had 4 or 5 workshops around with the locals, but especially when we talk about Copenhagen, and we talk about the Copenhageners who actually comes into the park, in the neighboring areas. So there are quite a few number of persons, and this was the quarrel, but it also was the discussions between, let me be honest, between the architects and then others concerning whom to approach. If you are an architect, you tend to listen more to developers than you listen to people. I don't hope architects is going to join this YouTube show, but it is like this. I really love architects. I had so much great time with them, and they're wonderful in creating and seeing so many spaces. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, then you have different cultures and how to listen to voice, vox populi. And my experience is, which is I'm currently following in Nature Park Ormosen, the west coast of Zealand, is small workshops with around 10 people and communication, very, very smooth communications, interactive communications, where people take their neighbors and the locals. So it's not interest groups, it's the one they know of. And I've done that then with about 140 people. And it's just like when you're doing a review, suddenly you begin to hear the same stories. At a certain kind, you know that you have enough. In Copenhagen, whoa, I would be still researching, right? But on the countryside, as you just told, it's true. And the danger, I think the one narrative, the man-made land, is very, very broad, is inclusive. Everyone actually can relate to that. We try that. But the other one is very traditional, touristic. But I was so polite in not saying this. I was so polite in just repeating what was going on in the project and this, and you just went directly into it. So, well, it gave me a chance to reflect with you. But I agree so much. It takes so much time, and there are wonderful methods in this on citizen science, whatever. We could have improved in much better. So this is important to all of you who wants to go follow such a path.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have really similar experiences. I work in a project where there's a lot of architects involved, and they're great, but the human stories can disappear a little bit because they're really focused on the structures. So it's an interesting negotiation. I was wanting to ask something that actually came up in Jesper's talk that I thought was really interesting, that was kind of hidden away in some of the others, which was about the issue of funding and infrastructure. You know, so particularly when we have places outside of urban areas, but even when they're not overly accessible to everybody, how much do we need the infrastructure to be in place? How much do we need the government support in terms of policies and strategies and money to make things sustainable? You know, ground up is really good, but you can't do everything without some kind of financial backing. So I was just wondering if anybody has any comments on that.
Maybe just briefly, because you just touched upon a point that I also highlighted in Jesper's presentation, and I found it kind of brave, this idea of initiating a niche market in order to then hoping somehow to influence also the demand side. How to say, starting enacting changes from the offer. What can be offered can drive also the type of demand that can be received. It's not always the demand side that drives the offer to respond in a certain way. And so touching upon this aspect, which I found very brave when you mentioned, okay, there are certain broader, larger processes going on, so to say, at a framework, legislative level, that change can be enacted also from the bottom. I was wondering if this raises somehow question of, yes, feasibility to a certain extent of, okay, this can be possible actually where there is somehow financial possibilities also to take the risk of instilling such a change without really knowing whether then this would be taken on and it would be still a niche but a successful one that has a perspective, or whether these two aspects can be somehow detached and this can be somehow a courageous, a brave venture. I think that there are still trends going on in terms of financing that push towards certain aspects which are not contradicting this niche development, and this idea of fundings which are increasingly becoming conditional based on sustainability choices, based on very specific targets to reach in correspondence also with the European digital agenda. This issue I was mentioning before of the fact that member states do have to invest 20% of the funds they receive in the digital advancement. And this needs to target the small and medium enterprises. This sustainability aspect for the CO2 reduction. I think there is somehow a push also at the more top level. But at the bottom up, I would say, okay, is it maybe the situation of Copenhagen, the very specific framework of the university maybe having funding? Would this be applicable to other areas? And what you mentioned, Jesper, with this aspect of the method that you're thinking about applying also to other areas, maybe can relate to this. I'm rather raising questions than answering, but...
Jesper? Yeah.
Thank you. As far as I can catch up with you, Laura, you have so wonderful, informative talks. It's so condensed. So I try to take part of it. I remember the latter part, especially on the question about, yes, in Denmark, we deliberately focused on, as you also touched upon, the economy as so important that you have to take in. The national park boards are funded by the government, so they have some money. And the nature parks, to some degree, also some money. And we are within a project development society, meaning the research is being privatized, unfortunately, into a growing degree. But this means that you do have the funds who are very professional in looking ahead, what goes on, and who are not fixed into the path dependency of which within the tourism trade, as I see it, has been for like 40 years. So actually, these partners or funds can make a difference. And we deliberately then took a departure in getting national parks and nature parks into the game and promised them from the day one that we wanted to make a blueprint or strategy paper in how to enhance. I disfavor this kind of things normally in my research, but this was sort of like a departure for getting the fund. But it's also a one way to hope for interest in a niche to become part of the regime. Still, you can say this is a growing niche of nature ecotourism around parks. It's not all tourism sector. So yes, you can get funding still. We've given them routes to how to find developers, but also fundings for parallel types of projects. So you are very well off. You have to clearly think about that as part of the strategy if you want to have success. And as I told you, nothing have happened in 40 years coming to finance, coming to trades, coming to business organizations, coming to the government or local municipality. Nothing have happened. So we had to find a new window of opportunity. If you go to Europark and look on their eco destination schemes and prospects, they either have like German or Austrian or Norwegian national parks with a lot of money, or they hope for the welfare state to go in and finance or regulate. It's not going to happen, as I see. It's in the 70s. Now it won't happen. So this is why we had to find a market-based type of thinking. But you're totally right. You need to have big finance in the end to flow into the tourism sector.
Yeah, I do wonder in terms of looking at some of the terms we're talking about, like we're often talking about projects, and the issue with sustainability in projects is about how long can they be sustainable afterwards, unless they can get more funding or continue on in some way or attract the attention of people higher up, because the sustainability issue is very difficult in terms of embedding something that quickly. And I think that that's one last thing I was wanting to ask Jesper, because you were saying that your project had finished in 2019. Can you see it embedding in terms of how these things that you have done has actually created sustainable processes moving forward, or are there certain things have disappeared and certain things have stuck?
There are now 3 national parks who have taken upon making sustainable tourism developments, and who have hired guides and nature interpreters exactly to enhance this. Within one of the parks, they've hired the architects, as I told you about, to establish path and images. And in the other projects I've been in, the same architects have succeeded in sort of like all this kind of nitty-gritty stuff, which are framing the visitors to the parks. Signs, intro material, maps, whatever. And the park bureaus are becoming more and more involved, engaged to develop this. Why? Because suddenly during the corona, too many people coming into the parks are threatening. We have a completely different situation during the last year. So they're also interested, like in Iceland, how can we regulate and sustain it? But the blueprint, we just said we haven't got any really responses to the blueprint in itself. But we can see the wonderful Copenhagen has taken up. They've hired people to professionally focus on sustained tourism in Copenhagen, and national-wise, this has become an issue. And we would like to think that we have been part of that game, but probably we might just have found an early window of opportunity that others also find during time.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a really fascinating project, and good to know what's happened to it afterwards. So I think we're at the end of our time now. So I was just going to hand over to Carolina as our project PI to say the goodbyes, but I really enjoyed everyone's contributions, and it's been a really great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for today, for the session and all your lectures, comments, and very interesting discussion. I think that we start the discussion with many different topics, and we have a lot of, I hope we have a lot of ideas which we can develop not only in a Cobalt project, but also in the future projects, I hope. So thank you very much for today. It was a big pleasure, and I hope that we will be able to cooperate and to develop all these ideas, not only in our Cobalt project. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon in reality, not on a virtual way, because the previous plan was that we all together we will see each other on a beautiful island on Bornholm, but we still have a small problem with that. So I hope it will be the end of this all problems. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very much. Bye.